Hey, thanks so much for joining us on the first coffee break. It's great to see so many familiar faces out there. Those who don't know me, my name is Miles and I am the community manager for ELT here at freed.com. And I see we now have around 60 people in the room. So if I can just ask politely, if everyone would just make sure they keep their microphones muted for this first bit, that'll make things go smoother for us. But hey, I'm delighted today to introduce our guest. I'm delighted to introduce a colleague of mine at Surveys Linguistics at Barcelona, Neil McMillan, who is also our current president. So Neil, hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, well. To give everyone else a bit of background, Neil has over 18 years classroom experience, and he's the director and tutor on SLB's TBLT course for teachers and course designers. He's also an associate professor at the Catalan Open University, and as I mentioned, a colleague of mine. So Neil, before today's session, we were chatting, and you told me that you take your coffee, if I got this right, with milk or a dash of Baileys, depending on the moment. So Neil, my first question today is, I must start by asking, what's in your coffee today?
There's no coffee in my water. I thought a coffee would send me over the edge, so sorry to disappoint you. This is a water break for me, but not that kind of water break.
I'll take it. I'm sitting with the kind of lukewarm coffee that's been there for about 2 hours, as most teachers do. It might be nice to actually, if everyone wants to kind of flick their cameras on and give us an idea of what's in your hand at the moment up in the chat box. Sarah, I see some water. Yes, well done. I might be the only coffee addict out here at the moment.
Sarah, priestly by name and priestly by nature.
Fantastic. There we go. Rachel. Oh, Rachel, I think I see a coffee in your hand. Anyhow, we're going to get down to it today, and this is how it's actually going to work. So, firstly, we're going to have Neil presenting for 15 minutes on the topic of task-based language teaching, as we know. And you're probably asking, how are we going to be doing the Q&A for the last 15 minutes today? And here is our solution. Everyone have a look at slido.com. You can do this on your desktop as you have Zoom open, but I suggest sometimes it's actually easier if you open this up on your mobile, so you can be concentrating on the Zoom session here and having questions on your mobile as we go. So please feel free to open slido.com as you see on screen, and you'll automatically be asked to enter a code, and the code being 28514 for today. Should any questions pop into your head during the session, please add them here. You're able to also vote for each other's questions. So the idea is in the last 15 minutes, we'll get a list of the top questions that everyone in the room would like answered today. And to bring it back, the burning question for today, Neil, I know that I ask myself this as a teacher quite frequently. Am I doing TBLT right?
No, you're not. No, I prefer to start from the premise that we're all probably doing it a bit wrong, but we can do it better. And I think it's probably a false premise that there's a right way to do TBLT at all. Mike Long, I think, characterizes research into TBLT as building the road as we travel. So as an approach or methodology, it's something still very much in development. And probably there are different ways of doing it depending on your context and what you can manage as a teacher. I was presuming that there are some people here that also have some responsibility for course design as well. And I think that's where you can really influence the kind of TBLT that gets done. But I haven't got a presentation. I'm going to try and keep this bit as short and sharp as possible, and I'll try in the process to answer a couple of questions that we had in advance. But rather than show you a presentation, I'd rather show you some tasks, and I think we'll use that as a starting point, if that's all right. So the first thing, well, let's see. I'm sure a lot of you recognize this book, and it's Cutting Edge, and it's a course book that kind of adopts a task-based approach. And I think one of the only ones that does so. There are others. I think widgets is one which maybe does it a bit more consistently. But let's use let's use Cutting Edge as a starting point. And let me just share a quick screenshot of an activity from that. So this is from New Cutting Edge Elementary. It's not the most recent edition, but it's a task where you describe a picture to a partner, and the partner has to kind of fill in the faces, etc., depending on the description. Okay. Now, I think what we need to do is, can this be distinguished from an activity, or is it really a task? So an activity, we might think, is like an exercise in which the object is to practice bits of language. And it's certainly got that in it. If I was able to show you the preceding pages, you wouldn't be surprised to find out there's a bit of presentation and practice, controlled practice of present continuous. And I think there's an expectation that students, when you get to this task, will use that. And if you look at the useful language box on the spread, you'll see that it's got things like what's he or what's she wearing. Okay, so that pushes this towards being what we might think of more of an activity. That is, the goal is not so much communicative, but it's linguistic. It's to practice bits of grammar. However, if we look at step 3 in the main task, the speaking bit, it says, when you're both finished, compare your picture with your partner's original. Are they the same or not? What are the differences? And that really puts a communicative goal onto it. And that's probably one of the key definitions of a task. It's got to be meaning focused, and the success, if you like, is measured in terms of task completion rather than in terms of how well students have used bits of language that they've been pre-taught, if you like. So this is something of a mix, I think, between an activity and a task. The question is, in different teachers' hands, it might be used for different purposes. My worry with things like this is they tend to be used, and students will tend to be assessed based on how well they use the present continuous, and that might be the feedback that they get. At least that's been my experience. However, in another teacher's hands, that might not be so much the focus. So this would be an example of what has been called weak TBLT. I would prefer to say that it's, because I think this weak strong distinction is a little bit pejorative, especially on the weak side. So there are two ways we could characterize it. Task supported language teaching, that's to say the task is communicative, but it supports the teaching of bits of language. Or we can call it integrated TBLT. By that I mean that the task is integrated into a kind of structural syllabus. So the practice part or the production part of the PPP model is a bit more communicative than just purely to kind of, produce bits of present continuous, right? It has got a bit of a communicative goal to it, all right? So this would be weak TBLT. The point about weak TBLT or integrated TBLT is it's the tasks themselves are not the building blocks of the syllabus, structures are. All right, and I think hopefully most of you would agree that that's how Cutting Edge works. And context, this is useful for, of course, context in which you're expected to teach a structural syllabus. Maybe students get assessed on that, their understanding or explicit understanding of or use of grammatical forms at the end of the course. All right, so that's Cutting Edge. The next couple of things I'd like to show you are from this book, which some of you might know. So this is Activities for Task-Based Learning, and it's by the other Nails involved in TBLT, Nails, Anderson and McCutcheon, and it's by Delta Publishing. All right, so this is a book which pretty much adopts Jane Willis's framework for task-based learning, and I'm not going to show you that just now, but if you do a Google search for Jane Willis framework task-based, you will find the famous diagram where it shows how she approaches task-based learning. Let me look at a couple of things. The first thing, this one, and I think this tends more towards what we're looking at with Cutting Edge. It's a dictogloss. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with dictogloss, but basically you dictate a passage to students a couple of times maybe, and in groups they try to reconstruct the text that you've just read out, all right? And the text is there at the bottom. It's about John having a very bad game of golf. And again, it's a kind of hybrid thing because it's It's communicative to the extent that students are they've got an objective, which is to reconstruct the text, and they're working together, communicating to try to do that. But it's linguistic in that if you look at the text itself, you might sort of see that it's kind of designed to test the recognition of narrative tenses, right? So you've got past simple in there, past perfect, past continuous, and some of the contractions associated with those tenses as well, right? So again, the outcome is a kind of mixture of communicative goal and linguistic goal. And I think that pushes it more towards being something that is like integrated TBLT or TSLT, task supported language teaching, where this kind of task can be used. Yeah, get students communicating, but get them working on accuracy of language as well. All right, so that might suit that kind of context where you have to do that. The second thing that I think pushes it towards being weak or integrated TBLT is it doesn't seem to be based on any particular need that students might have, any real life need. It's difficult to imagine where dicta pluses are done in real life. What kind of skill is that teaching students, or preparing students to carry out in real life? So I think it's another feature of integrated TBLT, that it's perhaps based less on student needs and more on students' interests, if indeed you do have any students that are actually interested in golf. I may have had one or two in the past, I'm not sure. So that's one activity from Activities for Task-Based Learning. And let me show you another one, which I think goes a little bit more in a different direction. And that is this one. So from the same book, it's a task to write a review of a hotel. Okay, and you can see the box at the bottom is kind of designed to replicate the kind of text box that you might find on websites like, I don't know, booking.com, or my mind was blank, some of the other ones that are used to rate accommodation. So this, in a sense, could be more pushed towards a different direction, in that students might have a need or a desire to be able to write little reviews in places they've stayed. I suspect maybe a more pressing need might be for students to understand reviews that they read about accommodation in order to help them make a decision about places they want to stay. Let's just imagine we live in a world where people can still go on holiday and want to book accommodation in places, right? So this, in a way, is perhaps fitting more into what might be called a strong TBLT model. The goal is definitely communicative, to produce a kind of understandable review. And I think later on there might be a gallery where students compare reviews. Less linguistic, perhaps, although by following the Willis model, there is a kind of suggestion to do a post-task language focus, where you might look at certain structures that are typical to that review and do a little bit more explicit analysis and practice of those structures. So what kind of happens with the Willis model is perhaps it can get dragged back to this task-supported model, where an additional focus is on language accuracy, or the study of bits of language, right? Again, it depends on in whose hands it's used, I mean, it could go in different directions, all right? But I think this is a more, a stronger task. So I think when we're looking at the strong version of TBLT, if we want to avoid these pejorative terms, we might use the term programmatic TBLT, which might sound a bit scary, but the idea of a programmatic TBLT, this is something I've made up, by the way, don't look for it in any books, is that tasks are the actual building block of the syllabus. The syllabus is not structured around language points that are done in a kind of sequential manner. It's built on tasks, and ideally, these tasks are derived from a needs analysis of what the students need to do with the language. Okay, so that's pushing more towards that. Okay, so the last thing I want to share, and then we'll open it up, which I think is another example of programmatic TBLT, and I hope it is, because I designed this thing. This one, okay, so this is a community class that was put online by the COVID crisis, and we developed stuff for students online. And a real need that came out of not a pre-course needs analysis, but a kind of ongoing needs analysis that took place, was these students who are mostly beginner elementary, were unable to explain the problems they were having with technology as we were doing the class. They weren't able to explain to me in English. And I was getting stuff like, Neil, this no work. And I was like, what? And they would say, I don't know, camera or something. And it was like a kind of detective, bit of detective work to find out what was going on. So the need that arose from that was they need to work on the task of explaining what's going wrong with technology. Okay, so we developed a sequence of things. Excuse my ugly face in these things, but the idea here was we were guiding them to different bits of the Zoom screen. So where do I click if no one can hear me? And if you click on this, then nope, that won't fix the problem. But if you click on unmute, then it does. Okay, as they're doing this task, they're getting fed little bits of language here, like bottom left-hand corner, which is often used. I did a bit of an analysis of how tech problems are resolved in a lot of these websites where people ask tech questions. Very often they're directed to a part of the screen, right? So I thought this was kind of essential language. So they go through these tasks. No one can see me. Where do I click? Well, hopefully they end up clicking on start video. Okay. And again, they're just getting fed little bits of language. So in a sense, it's meaning focused and there's vocabulary development going on, but it's being done in a kind of progressive way, if you like, as they go through these tasks. All right. So there's a few more of these. Where do I send a message? Okay. And they click on chat. All right. And this goes on to a little bit of explicit vocab teaching where they have to kind of get the idea of the different locations, right? And they can do this kind of drag and drop thing. That progressed on to looking at stuff in a bit more detail. And this is where I think we start looking at how form is focused on and how language is introduced in a meaning-focused, programmatic, task-based kind of lesson, where we use input enhancement and input elaboration. What does that mean? That when we're giving students stuff to read, we're drawing attention to key vocabulary with bold, or we're putting in redundancy. And here the idea is that they get used to the fact that I kind of shade words in colors that have similar meanings, all right? I noticed that issue was used a lot in these explanations online of how to solve tech problems, not problem. So I thought they need to know the word issue, and the idea here is that they can see that issue is synonymous with problem, okay? Anyways, so the idea here is that their camera is not working properly, so they get that right, they get some follow-up questions. And this finally led on to a productive task. So there were lots of input tasks like this, and the productive task was done on WhatsApp. And I'll just show you if I can go to this slide from another presentation I did. Let's see, can you hopefully see this slide? They were given these kind of emoji presentations of the tech problems, and they had to send me a WhatsApp message to explain what the tech problem was. And then they had to kind of answer each other and tell each other how to solve it. Okay, so that led to a communicative task on WhatsApp where we got stuff like this. I had to give an example because they didn't get it at first. I gave them this one and then they gave me some advice, okay? So here we have, again, what we call focus on form. It's kind of recasting. He said bottom, and I've kind of recast it as bottom, and he still got it wrong, but hopefully you'll notice that another time. And again, I'm just kind of like feeding back till they get to the right answer, okay? And then another one was, it turned out like this. I prompt them to explain more, and they come out with more stuff, right? Now you can see what happens with text-based communication is that maybe quite a long time passes before you get a response compared to in a classroom. In a classroom, after 30 seconds, you would have given up and asked another student. But the beauty of WhatsApp is that, you know, you give a chance to breathe, a chance to think about what they want to say, and it offers opportunities, if you like, for language development in that way that I think sometimes face-to-face spoken interactions don't offer, okay? So this is a kind of language development taking place in task. I think we had a question from somebody asking about, doesn't that interrupt fluency? In the case of this task, it's not quite fluency that we're working on, if you like, in the same way than in a spoken task. But I think what has to be remembered are two things. One is that focus on form will happen naturally in a spoken communication when a communicative problem is met, and students need a bit of language to try to get over that. And they might turn to the teacher, or they might help each other. So very often focus on form in that kind of fluency-based activity is student-initiated. And the second thing, this is just my opinion, but I think if we then go on and do a lot of explicit language work post-task, then what we're doing is we're kind of punctuating the lesson in such a way that the thing that stays in the student's mind is the explicit language work rather than the kind of task practice that they've had. So I think of it like a full stop, you know? If I tell you I've been drinking a lot, full stop, then you'll have a very different impression than if I carry on the sentence and tell you I've been drinking a lot of water, full stop, all right? So I just think where you punctuate a lesson, how you end it, has an impact on how students perceive it. And I personally recommend an approach where that language work, where that focus on form, focus on accuracy is integrated into the communicative task. And the argument there is, of course, it's reactive to student needs as they arise, and the students notice them better because they kind of are getting the feedback when they need it, as Scott Thornbury calls it, is kind of teaching at the point of need. All right. I think I'll stop there before I ramble on too much. But that's, I think, what I would call, you can call it strong TBLT if you want, but I think it's programmatic TBLT. It's part of a program where the program is based on tasks, and the tasks are chosen from needs analysis. And the other thing that distinguishes it from integrated TBLT is that the language work is far more part of the process of doing the task than something either put at the beginning or tacked on at the end. Okay? And I'll stop.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neil. I didn't want to jump in and cut you off at 15 minutes because it was just kept coming through. Fantastic.
Sorry that I went on longer, did I?
No, great. I think I was going to say, I mean, I just think the example task you gave is so relevant with students at the moment working online. The issues that we face every day with Zoom, it's pretty handy for them to be able to know to click in the bottom left corner, etc. So yeah, a great example of a real life task. I'm going to throw over to some questions now, as again, I will share my screen so we can see what has come through. I think, Neil, you've done a good effort in 15 minutes to actually address a few of these. So let's see the most popular coming through. The first one up here with actually 10 votes is, how could this approach be used in one-to-one classes? Are students only interacting with the teacher? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that now?
It's a challenge, that's for sure, but I think it's doable. I mean, I think we know we should be clear that task-based is not just about interactive spoken tasks. So we've got reading stuff, we've got written, whatever relates to what the student needs to do. But I think we all know as well from teaching one-to-one, at times you have to play a double role. You have to be one of the role play partners, and you have to be someone who can give feedback. And we might do things like recording the task where the teacher is a participant and then later on analysing it. The teacher as a participant can be engaging in focus on form in a natural way by recasting things back to the student that maybe haven't come out quite right. And it might be part of the natural flow of the conversation. So I think that probably the barriers to doing TBLT in one-to-one are the same as the barriers of doing any other approach one-to-one, and we can adapt to that.
Fantastic. Popping the next question up.
Sorry if that's a bit dismissive, but I think, you know, we've got ways of getting around these things.
Yeah, and that question was asked a couple of times even before the session as well. So I think you've done well to kind of show us that. The next one that has come up is, what would be a good TBLT activity for a beginner or elementary class? Again, we had a couple of these come through by email.
Well, the one I did, the one I showed you about tech problems was for students who were had a pretty basic level. I think at low levels, you want to be doing lots of input tasks, reading, listening stuff before they move on to productive. Maybe you do that less so at higher levels, where you can maybe throw students more into a productive task without too much input. And things that are kind of like building blocks for doing other tasks. So one of the tasks in Mike Long's book, Second Language Acquisition and Task-Based Language Teaching, is a task where students have shapes like triangles, squares, etc. And they get lots of input, and then they basically put these shapes into a certain order. And they have to describe that to their partner who can't see their order, and they have to put it in the same order. So that's a kind of building block task for later being able to locate things. Imagine in a shop or whatever, you want that one, that loaf of bread over there, the one next to the square bread, you know. So you simplify the task, if you like, not the language, kind of cognitively simplify the tasks to something that students can cope with. So I would say, yeah, lots of input-based stuff, and then moving on to productive things that are quite simple at first, and then you can build up the complexity. Describe and draw, these are other things that are, I think, work good at lower levels, like we saw with the cutting edge one.
Thanks. Moving on. Some people out there would actually like to know, and sorry, we've skipped over a question. Some people would actually like to know the software that you were using to create that task with the WhatsApp group and the different emojis, etc.
Yeah, it's called H5P. And if you've got a Moodle or a WordPress or I think Drupal platform, you can get it for free, and you get all sorts of activities. So one of them is this drag and drop or label a picture or other things that I think lend themselves quite nicely to language work. So it's called H5P, and I think h5p.org. Or I think you can pay for it, and then they host it on their website, and you can use it in any platform that you've got.
Fantastic. Next question is regarding planning and the shape of the lesson, as you'll see here. Do you start with the task to see what they already know or to identify the language needs? Or do you start with a model, with a model of the task? So I guess here we're probably referring, do you start with the exit task or the actual thing they're going to do in real life?
I think that's less about planning and more what you do in class. I mean, I think with when you're doing task-based stuff more ad hoc, then task, teach, task, you know this format of test, teach, test can be a good thing to do. You give the students a communicative task to do, you see how they get on, you give them a bit of feedback on it, and then you get them to do it again. Hopefully they've improved it, right? Just I think making sure that feedback isn't just linguistic. It could also be about how they manage discourse, pragmatics, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think ideally though, in a programmatic TBLT, you've identified the tasks they want to do in real life, you develop a program based on that. And I think very often then you're starting with a model of the task. Lots of exceptions. Maybe you're working with students in a vocational context that already know how to do this task in their first language. In that kind of sense, you can see, let's see how they do it in English with the language at their disposal. So then again, that task, teach, task can be quite a nice model to work with.
Thanks. I think the next couple of questions we might be able to roll together, and that is, does or can personalization make an activity a real task? And also, how real life should a task be?
I'm not sure what it means, the first question. I know what personalization means. I think a real task, I think the thing is about a real task, we call it a target task. That is the task they have to do in real life. What we do in the classroom, we might call pedagogic tasks. They're versions of that real task, if you like, often quite simplified until you get up to a more full-blooded simulation, right? Personalization, of course, if the students need to do this task in real life, maybe they're training to do tasks in the vocational setting, maybe it's academic, maybe they're already doing it with customers or whatever if they're working, then of course, personalizing it, I think, just brings it alive from them. I don't think it makes it a real task, but I just think it makes it more relevant and probably more engaging. And how real life should the task be? Again, if your tasks are based on needs, which I think is the programmatic TBLT, rather than just interests and topics, then I think you try to make it as lifelike as you possibly can, given the circumstances. But again, these things are very much context dependent. Okay.
Thanks, Neil. I think we've got time just for a couple more that we're going to squeeze in if we can. Next one that has popped up is, how does this type of TBLT differ from normal scaffolding in a lesson?
I don't think it differs that much. I mean, I think the thing about TBLT, it depends on principles of language learning that apply to lots of different approaches. And we need to provide students with a structure, so we're not like giving them stuff they can't deal with straight away, and we're trying to like get them there bit by bit. And in task-based language teaching, the idea is that we sequence tasks that go from cognitively simple to cognitively more complex, right? So we might actually go through a sequence of tasks, give them different versions. A quick example is tasks for, let's say, hotel receptionists dealing with overbookings. The first time they do the task, they might just have a couple of people who've overbooked and they've got 2 or 3 rooms to offer them instead. In the next version, there's more rooms available, there's more people, and they've all got different characteristics, right? And as you build up the complexity, the idea is that it kind of pushes the students' language development. So yeah, there are lots of principles in TBLT that are, I think, applicable across many approaches to language teaching.
Thanks. And let's take the last one as we squeeze this in for 15 minutes. And that is when students evaluate their performance after a task or unit, some may be quite critical of themselves. I know I found this, where others are kind of more very complimentary. So how can we guide this discussion better post-task?
Right, so I think one of the ways to do this is if you've got very clear criteria for what makes task performance successful or not successful. And again, these should be communicative criteria, not necessarily linguistic. It's not about did the students use this bit of grammar correctly. And one of the ways to do that is with a proper needs analysis. You're not just asking students what tasks they need to do in real life. You're hopefully getting the chance to ask experts how these tasks are performed and what makes for a good or bad performance for that task. So if you've got quite clear criteria for success or failure of the task, then I think that's a way of guiding the conversation. Of course, you're going to get people that are going to beat themselves up because they mispronounced some past participle, and others that don't analyze it that much, but I think that's just the nature of teaching, right? But I think, yeah, clear criteria on success or failure should improve that conversation.
Thanks so much, Neil. I feel like we've absolutely ringed your brain there for the last 15 minutes, and we all really appreciate it. You can probably see on screen right now, this list goes on. We've received kind of many, many questions, and we will do our best to kind of get to those, maybe in a summary post that we can shoot out for everyone as well of this lesson, which will come out next week.
Okay, I'm sorry, obviously we're only ever going to be able to scratch the surface. I can see lots of questions, which is great. I think it shows people are really interested in this. I'll just reiterate, I don't think anyone's doing this particularly right or wrong. It's horses for courses. And speaking of courses, we do have a 100-hour course on TBLT, so that kind of shows how much in-depth you can get with this if that's where you want to go. But I hope this has answered some of your questions, piqued your curiosity, and I'm sure we'll be able to carry on this discussion on other platforms as we progress.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil. That's exactly it. A final plug. Neil is, as he said, the director and course writer for a course which is a 100-hour online course to prepare teachers and course designers to implement a TBLT approach. The good news is everyone who has come along today is going to be getting a 10% discount voucher for that. So as soon as we wrap up today, please do be sure to check your email inbox, and I'll be shooting that to you well, within the next 5 to 10 minutes. A final thank you for coming along. Neil, would you like to add anything about the changes that you've made to the course recently?
Just to say that our course tries to cover all these bases, that I think it's not just for teachers that are teaching in vocational contexts. It might be teachers teaching in general contexts as well. We try to look at how needs can be uncovered for students who apparently only don't have needs in common, and we can work like that. And we try to show how needs analyses can be done on a kind of progressive, ongoing, almost ad hoc basis. They don't have to be super thorough in advance because sometimes that is just not practical or possible. So we do try to be pragmatic in the way we approach TBLT.
Thanks so much. Hey, a final thank you from all of us. If everyone would like to give a kind of silent round of applause to the camera for Neil. Thank you so much. We do appreciate you giving up your afternoon to come out and have a coffee with us. A final note to me before we disappear. As we said, the coffee breaks will run every couple of weeks. Thank you to freed.com, a platform where I'm working and a platform that connects teachers to be able to share resources and find the best ideas online. We will run again in 2 weeks, and next up will be a session on the delta So the question we're answering is, how do I know I'm ready for the delta? Something I asked myself before taking the dive and wish I had a little bit more advice a couple of years ago. So that's it from us. Look out for an email from me, and take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for your questions.